Welcome to Job Tales, the podcast that brings you real stories from professionals across industries. Today, we're stepping into the world of midwifery with Amy Leather, an experienced midwife who has dedicated her career to bringing new life into the world. That sounds amazing. Amy shares what it truly means to support mothers and babies through one of life's most transformative moments. If you've ever been curious about what it takes to be a midwife, and you're interested in this job, then stay tuned for the next 25 minutes. Let's dive in. Amy, thank you for being on my show. I'm very
My
happy.
pleasure.
I have my first straight question. Everybody will know most likely what you do, but what is your job?
So I'm a midwife and I currently work on labour ward. So I am involved in the the giving birth side. So women who come in for an induction or to give birth because they're having contractions and they're in pain, or for a planned cesarean section. So those are the sort of main areas we cover. But being a midwife is actually so many other things. And I think in a way sometimes we forget that a midwife does much more than just helping a woman give birth. And basically a midwife can follow you from the moment of conception, so from when you are first pregnant all the way through your pregnancy if everything's fine, and will then follow you after and be with you at home. And midwives in France can even sort of do contraception and a sort of more gynecological side. So actually a midwife has a very large role. It's just that we often only see the kind of birth side. So I'm very privileged because I get to see that.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to know that there are midwives who have many, many roles in looking after women.
And so the other midwives that don't go all the way to the end, let's say to the birth?
Yes. I mean, you have midwives who follow the women through pregnancy. There are midwives who follow women through pregnancy and will be there at the birth. But I work in Switzerland, so midwives who follow the women at the birth, often that happens in what they call maison naissance, so a birthing home, or a woman who chooses to have her baby at home. Where I currently work, we don't follow the women. There's not one midwife who will follow her the whole way through her pregnancy. Each sector has different roles. So I've been in my sector for a long time now, but you realise even in every different area, there are a variety of roles you can have. And of course, some people feel more comfortable in sort of more adrenaline kind of filled environment. Some people want the more kind of supporting and working on breastfeeding and being there for the period after the birth, supporting women with their babies at home or on the postnatal ward at hospital. So there's such a variety.
Yeah. Did you follow a specific studies or academic path in order to become a midwife?
Well, I actually had a bit of a funny path because I was not academic at all and really struggled at school. I did that in France. I was at school, I arrived in France when I was 6. So I did most of my schooling in France and really, really struggled. And luckily I had an amazing mother who kind of never gave up on helping me get through as far as I could kind of go. And we decided when I was 17 that the French system wasn't really working for me. And all those years ago, there was not a lot of knowledge about difficulties, maybe at school, that were not a lack of intelligence, but things that maybe you just, struggled with. And luckily, being that I was from the UK and that I had English as my sort of mother tongue, I was able to go and study for a year in Scotland. Then I came back here for a couple of years, and then I went back to England and did what they call an equivalency to the baccalaureate. So I did subjects that were sort of science-based so that I could get into university. But it was basically for people who were maybe choosing to change their careers or just needed to go back to study more, who'd maybe left school early. So it was for kind of older students. I was the youngest. And that enabled me to get into university. I did 3 years at university. and in England. So this path is one that I probably wouldn't have been able to do 20 years ago in France. Maybe in Switzerland, it might have been a bit different. I don't exactly know 20 years ago kind of the exact pathways they had. But I was very lucky that I was able to do that, because otherwise I would have probably had to do something else.
Something else.
Yes.
So the 3 years in the university, what was your major?
Well, it's purely midwifery.
Okay.
So you're only studying that. You start your first year doing a kind of quite a general year where you're with nursing students, physiotherapists, and we're studying the body. We're studying different laws, different types of kind of just a more general sense of the body. And then bit by bit, you specialize in your area, and you start going sort of working in the hospitals and doing different you're going to different sectors of the hospital. And with midwifery, we're going to different sectors related to midwifery. So you start doing that in your first year, but you stay with students from a much broader background for the actual studying side. And then in the second and third year, you're solely with midwives. So all your classes are centered around midwifery.
Okay, so you did know back then that was going to be your path. That's what you wanted to do.
I did. I feel very lucky because I was debating a lot of different careers when I was in my teens. And I think I always knew I wanted to do something with people, but it was difficult to know exactly where I would find sort of where I'd feel comfortable. And I think for a long time I thought teaching was something that I would maybe want to do. But my uncle had a girlfriend who was a midwife in London at a very big London hospital. And she very kindly offered one Christmas while we were over, I think I was 17, and she offered for me to come spend a day with her.
Oh.
So I got a very privileged look inside a big structure in London where I got to see several births in one day.
Oh, amazing.
And it was really incredible. And I think I knew that day that it was definitely what I was going to try and do. I didn't know yet if I was going to get there because of the way my studies were going, but that was kind of one of my goals.
Okay.
And actually, when I applied to be a midwife, so when I was 21, I found out that my mum, I don't know why she'd never really mentioned it to me, but I actually found out that just before we moved to France, she'd applied to do midwifery in Oxford, where we were living. So it's quite interesting. And I think that's what made my 3 years of studying a lot easier, is that I had a mum who, again, as I was saying before, never, ever gave up on helping me during my studies. But I think the fact that she loved what I was doing made moments when she was helping me out, writing things, learning things, a lot easier, because she was enjoying it in a way just as much as me. So it made it fun.
Yeah. So wow. So that's your path was kind of designed for you, with you, and giving
Yes.
inspiration from. It's amazing how like one encounter,
Absolutely.
uncle's wife can change your
Yes.
life, right?
No, exactly. I feel that in a way, because she was one of a few girlfriends at that time, I haven't been able to, of course, see her again and thank her, because that day she gave me something that was very precious. It was an insight into a world that I didn't know. I knew about midwifery, but I think actually getting a glimpse as to what it might be and the intensity of that environment, I think was a very lucky thing, so that I wasn't maybe as scared to go for it when I wanted to try and be a midwife.
Yeah, and just before we started the interview, we were talking about maybe the conception or misconceptions of things. I was asking you if you had any myth
Yes.
about being a midwife, and please share with me and with the audience. So what?
Yeah. I've always had this feeling when I say to people that I'm a midwife. I mean, of course, I feel very very lucky and very privileged to be a midwife. But people, of course, their first reaction is how lucky I am and how wonderful my job must be. And it is, and I am very lucky. But I think it is true that, like any health professional, it's not an easy world to be in. I think we're dealing with, a woman and a baby. So we're dealing with two patients in one, which can be very intense. People are living the most wonderful day of their life, but things can change quickly. Things can be, emergencies happen, and we have to be very much sort of there, in the sense that it's when everything goes fine, it is amazing and wonderful. But of course, when things do change quickly, we have to be able to kind of refocus and to always be ready for anything to change, for any situation to evolve.
Plan B and
Exactly. And to realize that, sadly, it's a job where not everything does always go well. And of course, it's a world that when things don't go well, it's very, very difficult, very, very intense for parents. And we will do everything we can to support them in those moments. But of course, joy can change to despair and disaster very quickly. And luckily, those moments in my career there aren't that many moments, but they have happened. And it means that part of our job is very intense in many ways, in wonderful ways, and sometimes in very sad ways. And that we have a huge amount of responsibility, and that we can't forget that. And it takes a lot out of us to have that responsibility and that emotional involvement with our patients. So yes, it's just being aware of those things, not because I want to scare anyone but it's just the reality of what we do.
You better be prepared.
Yeah.
Do they prepare you during your studies?
I think you have some elements where they prepare you, but it's quite difficult in a way in 3 years to be prepared for certain situations, because you can't see everything. And sadly, situations of bereavement are things that you don't always get to see when you're a student. And you might learn more, of course, about it when you're actually qualified and working within a team. But I feel that whether you're a student or a young midwife, the whole point of working in a team is to know that you're never on your own. So I think that's what you do learn before, is that when things will happen, because it will happen and you will be involved in different situations. And I'm actually one of my areas that I'm very involved in is bereavement, the bereavement side of midwifery. It's one area that I've done different training courses in, and I'm very involved in. And I think it's the importance of knowing that you always have a team behind you, that you're never going to be on your own to face everything. And it will be hard, but you will get that support. And I think that's so important for young midwives starting or thinking about these sides of midwifery, is that you will have people by your side.
I have a question about gender, actually, because, midwife, you think, of course, of a woman. Are there men
Yes.
who do this job?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm actually very lucky to be working with some wonderful male midwives.
Okay.
Who we call midwives, and in French we call them sage-femme, and sometimes we might say homme sage-femme, but they still are sage-femme, and they are actually, I think, very important. And I feel lucky that I am working with several. On labour wards, there are only 2, but on other wards there are others, and I feel that it's important to. I think it gives a sense of balance. It's strange maybe to say that, but I think that they bring a different perspective and a different way of working. And I know that it might not make everyone 100% comfortable. Clearly not every woman who comes to give birth will feel okay having a male midwife. And I think that they've had to prepare themselves for those reactions, which are not easy, to be asked to have a different midwife when you go into a situation.
Yes.
But they definitely bring, I think, a lot of good things to us as midwives, because They help us to, I think, just understand things from their perspective and their understanding, and they might approach a situation differently. And I think that enriches our work and what we can offer women. And actually, honestly, a lot of the male midwives I've worked with have been very, very popular with patients, because I think some of them they kind of know they're never going to go through it. So they have a different kind of empathy.
I see.
So a different approach to, I think, caring for women in pain. So yes, I think their role is very important.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Wonderful. And I'm thinking what you were saying. You have two patients at once, the mother and the child.
Mm,
How about the partner? Because nowadays the partner comes to
yes,
the actual day of birth, and then they're there also even before during the
absolutely.
preparation,
Yeah.
the breathing techniques, the yoga
Yes.
sessions, and
Yes.
how is that dynamic?
When it's a good partner, for me, they're essential. They make my job so much easier.
Oh yeah.
And this is
Mm.
what I always say to them when they're saying to me, but Amy, what can I do? I don't know what to do. I don't know how to help. I don't know. And I always say that, honestly, they know their partner far better than I do.
Yeah.
So there are things that I might not notice or see in her eyes or something she says that he will be able to help me with. And I'm not able necessarily to be in the room the whole time. So the fact that I know that her partner's there
Yeah.
makes a huge amount of difference. And of course, not every partner does want to be there. And I think that's something that's very important, is that even though I'd say in society now we expect it, it's not always the only way to go. Sometimes women will come in with their mothers, sisters, a
Mm.
friend,
Yeah. Of
because
course.
the dynamic is better. And I think our role as a midwife is to make sure that whoever's accompanying this person is that they feel safe as well, that they trust us, and that we try and do our best to include them in the different things that we're doing. And of course, respecting their wishes for how much involvement that person has. Because, of course, some people want to be very involved, almost hands on, would almost get in there with us if they could, would wear gloves and be almost in front of us catching the baby.
Okay.
And some others would prefer to be behind a curtain. And I think that our job is to respect that and to try and manage it as best we can, as long as we're keeping everyone safe.
Safe. Yeah. Hmm. Skills, I'm thinking, there's of
Mm,
course hard skills, things you have to
yes,
learn and you have to practice, and that's with experience. But
yes.
what would you say are the most important soft skills in your job?
Well, I'm one of those people who, of course, as you say, there are the core skills you learn as a midwife, which you practice over and over again. But I suppose I always go back to what midwife means. The word midwife means with woman. And I feel that that's what it comes down to, is one of the key things is communication. I think when you learn how important that is in the care you're giving a patient, it makes all the difference, because you cannot communicate the same way you would with everybody. You have to adapt. And you're always adapting in this job, because no situation will be the same as what you had the day before. So you're constantly readjusting. But you know that by having a good level of communication, even if you don't sort of see eye to eye on everything, or if, sometimes personalities don't mix completely, or people don't find your jokes funny. I mean, I'm often told with my British sense of humour that it doesn't always go very smoothly. But I think that's the things to bring into a situation, is that we're all human and people are feeling very strong emotions. So we have to adapt to the fact that there are moments of joy, but there are moments of fear. And by communicating and by explaining what we're doing, I think that makes a huge amount of difference.
Yeah.
And of course, physical contact is another thing that, some women, of course, don't want to be touched in those moments,
Mm.
but a lot of women are open to that. So I think, of course, how we approach that is quite interesting, whether we're giving a massage, whether we're, holding a hand, whether we're giving a hug or pressing our head against their head because we're helping them have an epidural put in place, or
Okay.
whatever it might be. These are all things that I think they just kind of happen. And nobody can give you a list or can tell you how to do these things. You just have to go with it. And that's why it's so fascinating watching other midwives work, because we're all different.
Mm-hmm.
So, things that you might do one way, somebody else does it the other way. And it's not that either of us are
It's
right
not
or
right or
wrong.
wrong. Yeah.
It's just a different way of functioning. And that's the beauty, I think, of our work, is that we will bring, the same amount of kind of energy, or it's just different types of energy. And sometimes I know I frustrate some of my colleagues who have a lot more kind of dynamic energy and will be doing lots of, and I might come into a room very chilled, very relaxed, and it might be an emergency situation. And I know some of my colleagues have said to me, but are you not stressed? And I said, it's not that I'm not, but if I show you what state I'm in inside, then nothing's going to get done. So it's just, you have to kind of work off what is going on in that room when you walk in. So for me, these are all the core skills that you pick up with time, that are more subtle, that people don't always tell you about, but you learn to work with them.
Thank you for this. Yeah, it's definitely a big insight. If I think of, coming fresh out of your studies, you're looking for a job, is it difficult or is it easy to find a job as midwife?
I think it depends where you are in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I would say for some midwife, we always need midwives. I think that's the thing to remember. We always need them.
Okay.
But of course, not every hospital can recruit people, even if they're needed. They can't always give them a full-time job straight away. But there are around here a lot of agencies where you're going to do temping work.
Okay.
And that might be one way to get in to a hospital. But there's such a variety. I mean, in Switzerland, of course, there's also a lot of independent midwives. Now, you can't necessarily be an independent midwife straight away, but there are paths and ways of getting to what you want to do. It's just, it does take a bit of time. And I have had students over the past years who haven't always been able to find a job immediately, but have persevered and have got there in the end. But I can't, of course, say, oh, it's guaranteed for sure you'll find something immediately, because that wouldn't be true. I mean, it took me, this is 16 years ago, 17 years ago, it took me a couple of years to find the position I'm in now. And partly that was due to the fact that I hadn't studied here in Switzerland or in France. So, of course, recruiting a British midwife, even though I spoke French, was, not easy.
Does it change from country to country? Meaning, like, if you have your basic degree, can you do it in the UK, in the US, or in France, or do you need to have specific knowledge for that country?
I think one is language. I think
Yeah,
that plays a big part.
for
So,
sure.
can you speak the language? Then also seeing if your diploma or degree is equivalent to the one of the country you want to go to. Now, of course, sometimes you have to do maybe a small kind of exam or something that they may ask you to do to have an equivalency. Sometimes all you need to do is contact the Red Cross and send all your paperwork in, and they
Oh,
will
okay.
give you a kind of right of practice. But it really does depend what country you trained in, and if they consider what the training you did is equivalent to what is done in Switzerland.
Okay. Finally, what advice can you give to the young people who want to enter your line of work?
I think the advice would be to know if you're passionate, because I think that it's a career that I think demands passion and drive, because you've got to really you've got to want to go for it,
Yeah.
and you've got to love what you're doing. So I'd say those are the things, but I would also encourage any young person to see if there's any way of them spending a day in any kind of maternity, just to have a small kind of vision of what it is. Because I think it helps when
Yeah.
you're trying to make decisions. I think to get a bit of reality helps a lot. But
Yeah.
even if it's just talking to a midwife, even if it's just asking questions or reading books, I think just getting a little bit more knowledge helps you a lot to understand if it's a world you really want to be in or not.
Okay. It's very good advice. Yeah. And thank you for allowing me to have a glimpse of your professional life. It's been very insightful and interesting.
It's been lovely for me to, clearly you can see I get very excited when I talk about my job. So thank you
Yeah.
for allowing me to share.
Yes, and all the best for the rest of your career and many
Thank
more
you very
women
much.
to assist.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
That was Amy Leather, Midwife. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget you can find me on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcast, or wherever you listen. I'm always on the lookout for inspiring guests, so if you have any ideas, drop me a line at jobtalespodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you next week for another episode of Job Tales.